There's enormous pressure from the families of the hostages on the government of Benjamin Netanyahu to make sure that their people are brought back safely. And I think that it would be rather risky at this stage to go in full bore into Gaza in a way that might endanger their lives if you cannot show that you've made every effort to save them and bring them back home.
Israel carried out another targeted raid in northern Gaza last night as it continues to prepare a full-scale ground invasion. And the Americans carried out airstrikes on bases in Syria operated by the Iranian army. Here to tell us the latest is Catherine Philp, the Times' World Affairs editor, who's speaking to us from Tel Aviv. Hello, Catherine.
Hi, Asma.
What can you tell us about this targeted raid that Israel carried out? What are they targeting and what have they achieved through this raid?
So obviously the Israelis are not going to tell us exactly everything that they're up to because they're running raids now on a kind of a daily basis of this kind. The Israeli military have been massed on the border with Gaza in sizable numbers for about a week now. What we've seen is some sort of diplomatic action going on, particularly some liaison with the Americans over how they're going to carry out this offensive. And what we do know of the general aim of what the Israelis are doing is that they're trying to go into Gaza and eliminate what might be threats to their forces going in on the ground, and also trying to prepare a way for a ground invasion that could minimize civilian casualties. This is obviously, a huge concern that if they go in very large numbers, this is such a densely populated place that could happen. The other factor, of course, is some 220 hostages who are still being held in Gaza. We have Hamas has told us, whether trustworthy or not, that 50 of those have already died, and they have blamed bombardment for that. Nonetheless, there's enormous pressure from the families of the hostages on the government of Benjamin Netanyahu to make sure that their people are brought back safely. And I think that it would be rather risky at this stage to go in full bore into Gaza in a way that might endanger their lives if you cannot show that you've made every effort to save them and bring them back home.
What might every effort in that scenario mean, though? Because it's an impossible situation, really, I suppose, isn't it? For both sides, but we're specifically talking about the Israeli military at this point. How can they how can they guard against any other hostages dying when these hostages are presumably being kept, some of them in the tunnels, as we heard from those two elderly women who were released, in tunnels underground alongside Hamas terrorists?
Well, I think we can imagine that some of these raids will be reconnaissance missions, intelligence-seeking raids, where they're trying to figure out where those hostages are being held. I think that it's clear to us that they are being held in separate places, and some of them may not even be in Hamas's hands. Hamas itself has said that some of the hostages are with other militant groups who may, in fact, have been the ones who took them from their Israeli communities. So they are spread out. Israel is definitely trying to do what it can to find out where they are and how they might be, how a military operation could go ahead without endangering them. The other aspect, of course, is hostage negotiation, which is happening at a pace that I think Israel has not had experience of such a fast pace of negotiations when it comes to hostages in Gaza. The most famous case was a soldier, Gilad Shalit, who was held prisoner for 5 years before a mass release of Palestinian prisoners. 1,000 prisoners were exchanged for that one soldier. And many of those people went on to become leaders of Hamas. Some of them are indeed in the leadership structure right now. So you can see why the notion of swapping thousands of Palestinian prisoners for the Israelis and the foreign nationals who are being held hostage there is not something Israel would do lightly. It's something they would want to avoid doing. So it's an incredibly difficult balancing act, I think, that's going on in terms of trying to, balance the safety of the hostages with what you can do about Hamas's own infrastructure, and at what point you have to go in on the ground in what we assume will be a ground offensive. I mean, we've been told there will be one. Netanyahu's told the nation that. We still don't know when or how it will look.
The other thing, of course, that is going on right now is America conducting some airstrikes in Syria that it's said that are not related to the conflict in Israel. What's your reading of what is going on there?
I would say that they're saying it's not related to the conflict because they don't want the conflict to spread. But in fact, it is, of course, related to the conflict, because the people they're hitting are Iranian-backed militias who present a threat to American military personnel and American military sites in the Middle East. Now, their fear is that if Iran decides to get more involved, perhaps through Hezbollah, its militia in Lebanon, and indeed, it backs Hamas, so it's involved from that side, from Gaza as well. If the conflict were to spread, that would endanger, obviously, the enormous number of sort of US military interests in the region. So I think the US is sending a early warning sign to Iran that it will strike back if they try to widen the conflict. At the same time, that's we believe one of the reasons why the ground incursion into Gaza has not happened in full force yet, because the Americans are also moving into place in the Middle East defensive missile systems and other kind of military assets they have that could protect their people and their sites in the region.